Okay, my name is Ray Lutz. Welcome everyone here. We're at the World Resources Simulation Center in San Diego. I know there's a lot of people that wanted to stream this in other areas, and I hope that you're able to get online and do it. We had some people from Georgia, from Montana, and Connecticut, and Northern California, and up in other counties in California that were interested in this, and one of our goals is to deploy this to these other areas. So I'm with Citizens Oversight, and I guess I'm going to have to click this once in a while. The presentation here today is about election integrity, and I point out this somewhat famous quotation from Joseph Stalin: "The people who vote do not decide an election, the people who count the votes do." And this is what we're up against. We have a problem in that no matter how the election is done, we have to provide oversight. The members of the public have to be there to provide oversight. I'm going to stretch this thing out so I don't have to walk so far. Well, it's going to be good for me to see it anyway. And you know what? It's going to be right here, so.
While he's doing that, can everybody make sure that their phones are turned off?
So our goal here today is to provide some background about this oversight protocol that we're presenting and allow other people to deploy it in other areas of the country. We're going to get a little background about Citizens Oversight Project itself, talk about the fact that we have inadequate independent election oversight. It's rampant. There isn't much at all. We're going to go through in some detail the method of counting votes in San Diego. And then I'm going to describe the Snapshot Protocol, which is what we're calling this method. And then basically how and where it can be implemented, and then go through some questions. So basically, Citizens Oversight is a 501c3 nonprofit. It's based in Delaware, but our headquarters is here in San Diego. And the mission is civic engagement through direct governmental oversight. And the most important office in democracy, this is a quotation from Supreme Court Justice Brandeis. He said the most important office in a democracy is that of the citizen, because the citizens actually have to provide oversight for all other parts of the government. What we did in terms of election integrity is we provided we actually worked on a top-to-bottom review of the canvassing procedure. They call it a canvass when they're counting up the vote, used by San Diego, and we did this between 2008 and 2010. We reviewed 5% of the precincts in a lot of detail. That's 85 precincts. And one key issue that we found is that the Registrar of Voters here in San Diego does not actually maintain much of any documentation about what they do. So we had to reverse engineer everything to figure out what they're actually doing. And then we found that no one is really providing any oversight here, except for us. We go in and we provide oversight to the election, but there is no other group doing it. Sometimes you'll see, if there's a close election, one of the parties will come in and check out and see if they can do something. But in general, no. And so the Snapshot Protocol is something that we've designed to fill this void, and we've deployed it a couple of times, learned from our mistakes, and now we're ready to suggest that other areas start to use it, because it's actually very easy to do. As I said, election oversight is missing. In all canvassing methods, even if you're doing paper ballots and hand counting them in the precincts, you still have to provide oversight. You have to provide oversight after it leaves that point, and when you have to watch them there. You have to then watch them when it comes in and tally up or accumulate the totals. And it's actually harder if you did the hand counting ballots in the precincts, because with 1,600 precincts, you have to have 1,600 volunteers watch 1,600 precincts or a fraction of them. Even if you just did, I don't think you would be good just doing 1%. You've got to do more than that, but this is what we have here. Now, electronic systems have exacerbated this problem, makes it much more difficult to do oversight. Many parts of the country, they're still faced with pure electronic systems where they vote in a vote capturing machine, and then you can't follow it from there. There's no paper trail or anything. That's the way they were progressing in San Diego County, and we did get a ruling by the Secretary of State which gave us this 1% manual tally, which is a big help. We can do a check because we do have the 1% manual tally, even though the rest of the system is electronic. Now, this is a diagram of the system used in San Diego, but we're going to pull this apart because it's a little bit too complex to do all at once. So we're just going to skip this slide, even though it is all here. This slide here, let me get, a pointer won't work, will it, Mike?
It will. I have one right here.
Okay. Well, will it show up?
I will take care of it.
Oh, okay.
That's it later.
Okay, see how this works. All right, so up here in the left-hand corner are these little circles represent the precincts or the polling locations where people are actually casting their ballots. This whole slide here has to do with the physical, the people that are casting their vote in person at the physical location. So the precincts, you cast your ballot here, and then they are transported into incoming inspection. Everything is that you see listed here, the durable paper ballots, voting machine memory cards, but very few people actually vote with the voting machines. And then you have sign-in rosters, both with the standard voters and provisional voters. People that may have gone to the different precinct to vote or may not be on the registered voters list. And then, as you see here, it goes through incoming inspection. And after that, they have, for each precinct, a box of ballots. It's kind of hard to fix the elections at this point or before because you'd have to go to all these precincts or intercept the ballots on their way to the central area and maybe swap out ballots, physical ballots. So it's pretty difficult to do. Most of the things that you hear about have to do with voter fraud, voter ID laws and so forth, which would be dealing with people, trying to block people basically from coming in if they don't have the right ID. And except for the fact that they can sometimes block a lot of people, that's going to be hard to fix the election. If you were actually engaged in voter fraud, you really couldn't fix an election through that. So it's mostly a myth that that is an issue. Go to the next slide. Okay. No, you went back. You went back one. Go to the other way. There you go. Okay, this is a picture from a couple of years ago, actually in 2008. Just to give you a sense for what each step is. This is incoming inspection. They have these tables set up in a big room at the Registrar of Voters office, and they, by the way, have moved their office, so it's not going to look like this anymore. But basically, the ballots come in at the far end down there in boxes, are transported up to these tables, and then the workers there would open the box and inspect, make sure everything's in there. They usually look through the ballots and just check them out, see if there's anything that's really grossly wrong with the ballots. Go on to the next slide. Okay. So as you see the ballots coming in there at the top, going into the scanning, these scanners that they use are the same scanners that were utilized in the precinct before. So you used to see a small little scanner that you would, as you were voting, they would feed your ballot through it at the precinct. That's the exact same type of scanner that they're using now in the central office. The reason they moved it there was because they did have to they had a problem with the potential of someone hacking into the scanner itself and changing what the vote would be in those scanners. In fact, they had quite a bit of a loss of the little EEPROMs that were there, and the whole set of EEPROMs could have been changed for all of the scanners. So it was actually quite a threat, a vulnerability that they had to work around. And the way to work around that they determined is to move the scanners all to the central processing facility. So then, after the ballots are scanned in a precinct by precinct basis, so I want to point out here that they're scanned in each precinct as a batch. And then all of that material goes into storage. It'll be accessed later only if we go through the 1% manual tally. The memory cards are then hand carried into actually another scanner, which would be right here, feeding into the central tabulator. So they're not plugged in directly into the machine, but they're plugged into a scanner which has that type of card reading capability. The central tabulator tallies all the votes, and we also have vote by mail ballots coming in here, and I'm going to explain that in a second. They're coming in also to the central tabulator. Before they scan, the workers are required to zero out the scanner that they're using and making a paper tape and showing that it's at 0, then scanning all the ballots for that precinct, and then getting a total. That tape is a paper record, but they don't actually physically refer to that. But it is something that we used in our analysis, in our review. We actually did scan 85 precincts tape so we could take a look at what the scanners put out and to compare that with what they actually received in the central tabulator. Go ahead to the next slide. So here's a picture from the Registrar of Voters of them scanning the ballots. You can see the little scanners here up on top of a cardboard box. The scanner is only about 2 inches tall, and the workers feeding the ballots in one precinct at a time. This worker here is reading the paper tape to take a look at it. So they have maybe 100 volunteers, or I guess they're paid volunteers, to do this precinct scanning. Go ahead. Then after they're done with a precinct, that memory card is carried over to these, you can see the memory card right there. She's going to plug it in. She's actually putting it into a box. They plug it into these scanners, and these scanners are only used to read that memory card. Go to the next one. And then this room right here is inside a secured area of the Registrar of Voters. And these computers here, these are the display heads for the central tabulator and keeping track of the entire counting process. We thought it was kind of disturbing that they had this electronic voting machine located inside the secured area. And we kind of complained about that because they could potentially insert votes there. Okay, the central tabulator is what we're going to be interested in. Go ahead to the next slide. And we can't get to it physically, but we can check it. Before we go on, we want to cover the vote by mail flow chart. These ballots are coming into the precinct in mixed order, so they're not going to be gathered up in a per precinct fashion like we had in the physical precincts. They're all going to be mixed. First step is somewhat problematic, possibly, is a signature comparison where they take the ballots out of the envelope. On the envelope itself is your signature. They compare that signature with what's on file. It's either on file there, or I believe they also use the Department of Motor Vehicles. Then they're scanned in mixed precincts, and the scanners have the ability to extract what is the precinct of that ballot from the ballot itself. And it goes into the central tabulator again, as I mentioned. Unfortunately, we can't implement the Snapshot protocol on this part of it because, as I'll mention later and explain more, it requires that the snapshot is obtained prior to the manual selection, and they're scanning these ballots long after the election is is theoretically over. I mean, election night happens, the result is publicized in the newspaper, and then they continue to count these maybe 100,000 or 200,000 ballots are uncounted at that point. And no one really understands that much of the election, a large percentage, maybe 30–40% of the ballots have not been counted at all. So let's go on to the next slide. Now, California now requires a 1% manual tally. Now before, that would have been the end of it. The central tabulator would have tallied up the result and they would have declared what it is. No way to watch anything at all in there. And so the central tabulators really are a danger spot, because somebody here, a compromised individual perhaps in the Registrar of Voters, with one mouse click could move votes over from one candidate to another. Maybe 10,000 votes at a time. So it's much easier to fix an election through this. If they were going to fix an election, they would want to end up with the vote count significantly different, at least by 5% over, so that there was no question that the person won the election. And then no one would go back through and question it and really get into the details of recounting it. So we take the central tabulator, that's where we're starting with this 1% manual tally, which is new. They have an election night report, which you can see online, and as part of our process, we're always going to want to capture that. The day after the election, we want to capture that election night report so we know exactly what they said. And then they perform a 1% precinct selection. I'm going to show that in a picture in a second, where we're selecting 1% of the precincts of the total number. In San Diego, it's about 1,600 precincts, so they're going to choose around 16. And that's not going to necessarily hit every race. So if there's any race that does not have at least one precinct selected, they're going to go back and pick a precinct randomly for that includes that race. You have a lot of areas in the county here. It's a pretty big county. You have different districts. You might have a school district, a fire district, a water district. These bubbles all are in strange locations, and the chance of getting them all is pretty low just by the random selection. So they do go back in and pick a few more, but they only tally that one race for that area that they were missing. And after the 1% manual tally, then they do produce this report. The report here in San Diego was always something that we complained about. It was just a couple of pages long, whereas the LA County report was 1,300 pages. Now I know that they're a bigger county, but they just do a better job of reporting, because that's a significant difference between a couple of pages and 1,300. Okay, so let's go on to the next page. Now I'm going to cover the Snapshot Protocol, which is what we're going to add to the process that you just saw. The first step of this process is to send a letter to the Registrar of Voters to informing them of our intention to perform this. This is really important, of course. They're going to need to be informed that we intend to do it, because they have to cooperate. But also we want everybody in their whole departments to know that we're watching them, because that act of watching them is worth a lot. Even if you do nothing else, just to do this step and get the CD is probably enough to kill a lot of illicit behavior. So I'll show you that in a second. It can be emailed, but it's better to make 2 copies and hand carry them to the registrar and then have them both date stamped. You keep 1 copy. That way you bypass any charges for certified mail or anything like that, and you get it immediately. This is a case here. I just emailed the Registrar of Voters last week this letter, got no response. So I'm going to have to carry it in, have them date stamp it, and then by law they've received it. So, because you get 2 copies with their stamp on it. And we do have it, and we can help any area with this letter, get it set up so that you have a letter on letterhead that looks official and it has all the elements in it. But basically the letter that we use is the one that you can just copy. Let's see, let's go on to the next slide here. And I just have a picture of the top of the letter. You know, it basically says, I'm not going to go through all parts of it, but basically it says we're doing the Snapshot Protocol and some steps. We're going to need the Snapshot CD and how we're going to interact with them in terms of their 1% manual, picking up the Snapshot CD, the 1% manual tally, doing the precinct selection. So let's go through each step. And no, that was the slide there. Yeah. So the step is, they're here, they have the election night report. When we get the Snapshot CD, it's going to match their election night report. If someone tampers with the election results, it would happen here in the central tabulator. Therefore, the election night report will have the tampering shown. It'll be the results that they wanted. Before, they would do the 1% precinct selection randomly, but it wouldn't be a surprise. So they would then, before it gets to the manual tally, the ballots that were pulled in here, and the report, this snapshot of the election could be fixed up for the selected precincts, because they're the ones that are going to be hand counted and compared with the actual results. So nobody got to see those results before. We're now going to be seeing the results before they pick the precincts. And therefore, there's no way that the compromised individual can fix up the precincts from what they said. And therefore, it's a chance that during this manual tally procedure that the report won't match what we've got over here. Let's go to the next slide. I think looking at this step by step will help everybody understand. Here's where we're getting the CD. This happens first. So we get the capture of the entire election after election night, every single record of every single precinct. And they actually make a file that's unbelievably big for what they've got. It's about 170 megabytes for San Diego. It's actually larger than if you captured all the votes. This happens at noon on the day after the election, usually is when they do this. And so what we're going to do is have a group of people meet over there at the Registrar of Voters office and accept this CD as you're seeing here. All right, go on to the next one. Then we work with them because they need volunteers to do this that are not part of the Registrar of Voters. And we choose some ping pong balls one at a time for the thousands, the hundreds, the tens, and the units, digits. And that chooses the random precinct number, which is going to be part of the 1% manual tally. We're suggesting that they block these up and pick 1 per 100 precincts. Because what we found in the past is that a lot of times you'll have a whole bunch of them grouped together in one spot and not cover any of the other precinct areas, any parts of the other areas of the county. So to take a random, in blocks of 100, get 1 out of the first 100, 1 out of the next 100, and so forth. It's still random and a surprise, but spreads it out a little bit better. Let's go on to the next. And Paul Gomez, I don't see him in here, but I thought he was going to show up today. And then they go through the manual tally process. This doesn't happen right away. This is going to happen a little bit further downstream, like maybe the next week. And then it can take a week or two for them to actually go through this process, depending upon the election and how many ballots were actually cast. They allow us, and this was kind of a difficult thing, to bring in our camera. They objected to this, and we persisted, and were allowed to bring our camera in and make a recording of the tallying process. What they do is they have one person, actually they have 2 people that tally them on tally sheets, and then one person, you can't see him on that group, who looks at each ballot, each race, and they say, you know, vote for president, George Bush versus Al Gore, whatever they're going to say, they say what it is. The other person checks it off, puts a tally mark on their tally sheet. It's a very boring process for the human mind. and therefore it's almost impossible for them to come up with corresponding results. It's much harder than people think. People think, oh, manual tally is going to be easy. It isn't. It's really difficult to get those results to match. It would be better, we think, to have two teams of tally people work independently and come up with their result and compare it, and then go back and do it again if it doesn't match, versus what they do, which is compare it with the computer report. So the computer report is floating around in the room, and we'd rather not have that report seen. Okay, so go on to the next slide. Now, meanwhile, well, we can actually do this right away, because as soon as we get the CD, we reduce the snapshot data file down. It was originally 170 megabytes, which almost nobody can even load onto their computer. You have to have a pretty good program to load this file in. But we have a program that will boil that down to 2 megabytes. And that's one line per precinct with every race as a column. Whoever has the, not every race, but every ballot option is a column. So if you're voting for people or yes and no, each column has one of those options. So there's many columns. Each row is pretty long. But then it's compacted. What they have is one line for every single precinct option vote. So it expands a precinct out to every single race. And so every single precinct has a line for every race. And that's why it's so big. But then we pull out the precincts involved in the 1% manual tally so that we can compare it. And what we're willing to do as we deploy this around the country is become a central clearinghouse and help you make sure that you're getting the programs needed to boil down this data file that they provide that's almost impossible to work with. And I think they intentionally do it that way so that it's difficult to understand what's going on. And then also to allow us to sort of archive this stuff and so that we can see what's going on in different parts of the country. Let's go on to the next slide then. Okay, so let's look at some red flags, like what would happen if these don't match. If the manual tally workers have to rescan the ballots because they didn't match. Now, this used to happen a lot before we did this. They said, oh, something was wrong. Let's just rescan them and get a new count from the scanners. That means that something was really wrong. Somebody either manipulated that result or it could have been a mistake and the scanning person didn't get the ballot scanned. That's true. Or it could be that it was manipulated. When I first observed it, they were doing that a lot. They were rescanning the ballots because they didn't match. That's a really red flag because it means that they may have so if they do this and after rescanning the results match the snapshot data that we have, then that's the red flag saying that they probably changed it before so that it was going to fix the election for their desired result versus what we captured. Now, I said before is that if they know that we're performing the protocol, they're not even likely to go in and hack with the election like I mentioned. The thing is that they could fix up the precincts so that it would match and they wouldn't have to rescan them. Like if you said no rescans allowed, they could still go in and say, before they give the ballots to the people doing the 1% tally, they know this is the precinct. Okay, go over to the computer and fix it up so that it matches and that there won't be any problem with that precinct. Meanwhile, fix a different precinct with what we want the election to be. All right, go to the next one. So the red flag number 2, the other way it could be wrong is if the manual tally doesn't detect any problem, they say it matches, but the results of the full election don't match the results of the precinct-only ballots. Now remember, we're only able to really do the snapshot with the precinct part of the ballots, not the vote-by-mail ballots, because they came in too slow. What they do with those, unfortunately, is select the random batches that they're going to choose for the recount before they've even been scanned. So the people in the central tabulator room can say, okay, we know which ones we're not going to manipulate the other ones, and then it'll always match. So we still don't have an ability to provide oversight to the vote by mail ballots. But if they did modify the vote by mail ballots, we have to look at the results of the election to see if what's been held constant and honest by our oversight, that is the precinct side, if they manipulated the other side to fix the election up. Go on to the next one. I got some examples here. In our last election, we had Bonnie DeManis is the one that won this. She had to get at least 50% of the vote. And I just want to point out, if you look at these numbers in the snapshot data, which was fixed constant, and what they actually found in the total election is this. This is a total election, but only the precinct part. This is the 1% data. And if these are off much, and they're not, you see it's almost the same, 55% and 56% in the total election. It actually is, you would expect it to be the other way if they were going to fix it. In other words, the whole thing would be even better for her. Let's say it would be more, and this would be less. So go on to the next one is one that's suspicious. Okay, this is where we have City Council seat number 2. Now, unfortunately, we only got one precinct in our sample because this is a small district within the county, whereas the district attorney is the entire county. This one is only a small district, and we only got one precinct out of it. If you look at Lori Zapp, which is the favorite, in the actual ballots that were counted, she barely made it at 50%. And that was the cutoff in this race. You don't have to go on to the runoff if you made it through and you had more than 50% in the first part of the election. They claim that in the snapshot data she got almost 53.58% more than we found in this one precinct that we sampled. So really we didn't get a big enough sample to know, but if we did have a larger district involved, this would be a concern if we saw that the polls data, the 1%, this is what they actually counted, was going against the leader like this. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Really what we'd really be concerned about is if, somebody got 55% in the full election, but, 45% or something completely flipped in the snapshot. So here's a summary of the entire process, and this is why it's really easy to do. We send a letter in. That doesn't take much time or effort. You email it. If you get a response, you don't even have to hand carry it in. Then we go in and we pick up a snapshot CD prior to the precinct selection, the random selection. That only takes a few minutes picking up a CD. Then we participate in the random precinct selection. That only took about a half an hour of drawing the balls, and we video recorded it. That's actually most of what up through 3, actually 1 and 2 is really the heart of this. Because once you've picked up the CD, then they know they can't fix the election through this process of central tabulator hacking and undoing the precincts that they know are involved in the 1% manual tally. But going on, we draw the balls and we notice how they're doing that. We don't want that to be done improperly. And then we go in and check the 1% manual tally process. That is that room that I showed you, and we don't have to stay there the whole time. You want to come in a few times, make sure you understand what they're doing, look at their paperwork, get any questions answered that you have about how it's being handled. Then, this is important, number 5, we do have to obtain the report after the manual tally is completed. And then it's on our side that we reduce the data and compare these things. If we see the red flags of an election completely flipped, and I probably should have had a better example, not a real example, but a hypothetical example of one that would be flipped and we would then be catching it. So I'm going to modify the presentation to do that later. Reducing down the snapshot CD is just a matter of running a program. Comparing it is pulling out those few precincts and then looking at the actual final report. An extension that you don't have to do is to look at the manual tally working documents and the sign-in rosters. The sign-in rosters are a little bit hard to review because they won't let us scan those. They say that because there's signatures on the sheets from people signing in that they can't scan them. So we have to then go in there and sit down and look through them and then write down how many people signed in on the actual sign-in sheets and the provisional sheets. The goal there is to try to look at how many ballots were brought in, how many were actually cast, how many were spoiled, how many are still blank. So it should add up. You know, you should have those. But unfortunately, only in about 7% of the precincts did those all add up in the election. And there was only a few precincts where everything added up perfectly, which was really surprising that it was that bad. Okay, go to the next slide. So the optional extensions are, we could go on and ask them, how many ballots did you actually print? The total number that they got from the printer, and see how that compares with the number of cast and spoiled. And because if there was a whole lot more printed that are not accounted for, then they could have actually stuffed the ballot box with additional ballots voted their way, thrown the other ones out. So this is another thing that to check on, how many ballots were actually printed and then how many are used. Not as simple as it sounds because they have to print a whole bunch of different languages, and so it is kind of a complex addition problem. This is another thing we did one year, is checking the polling places for propriety. When they first introduced the voting machines, they had to move their polling places a lot of times. And one of their habits was to put those polling places in the churches, sometimes in the sanctuaries, even up on the altar in some cases. Can you imagine voting for Prop 8 in front of the cross, you know, at your church? A little bit of influence there. We also found that in these churches, there would be voter guides on the table on the way in, suggesting that how people would vote. And so we had to complain about both of those things. I would rather see no polling places in churches at all, or if they are in them, definitely not in the sanctuary, but maybe in a meeting hall. They have security seals on the boxes, but they don't really track them very well. We looked into the security seal situation, and there were 99 cases, that is situations where the security seals were either broken, missing, or wrong. And they did no follow-up on the security seal situation. So we don't know why 99 boxes were apparently opened or resealed. Normally, if you have security seals of this kind, you're going to want to have additional paperwork with the number of each seal that you have applied. And that paperwork needs to go a separate way from the rest of the boxes. You don't want to have both the documentation of the security seals next to where the security seals could be manipulated, because then they can do both. Same with the paperwork from the ballot precincts should progress separately to the Registrar of Voters from the actual ballot. So the number counted and the sign-ins should progress separately from the ballot, so that if you want to intercept the ballots and change them, you can't get to the rosters. It would be nice to follow these delivery trucks with a video camera and find out if someone is intercepting them and swapping in the ballots on the way, because you'd have to follow a lot of trucks. And so we'd probably want to sample, say, well, let's follow 10 trucks and see what happens. One missing part here is the random selection of the vote by mail batches. We would like the random selection to occur after all of the scanning is done of those vote by mail batches, such that the totals, so that we can get a snapshot total of them before they choose the random batches that they're going to scan. Otherwise, they can just fix up the ones that they picked. And right now, they pick them even before they scan them. So they know, okay, all right, watch out, this is the one that's going to be tallied, you know, make sure it's good. And so they're making sure all they're good, and meanwhile, maybe fixing up the rest of them. When we did our analysis, we found there was a lot of ballots just missing from what ran through the scanner and what was signed in. About 5% of the ballots just went missing. And we thought it was a big concern, but somehow by the end of the election they reappeared. So they had this procedure that's undocumented, which is the final reconciliation, and somehow all those ballots, a number of ballots, reappeared. So I'm very, very suspicious about those ballots, 5%, which is a big number, just disappearing and then finally reappearing later. So in order to get that, this, well, it's not on this particular list, but I mentioned it earlier, which is the sign-in rosters, checking how many people signed in and comparing that with the number voted. And you can do that with all of the precincts if you want, because the snapshot shows all of exactly what was voted in every precinct. We've got that. And so the number signed in should match pretty close to what was there. Not off by 5%, it should be pretty darn close, like within 1% at least. So that's the story on the snapshot. Because this is really easy to implement, it's just a matter of a letter, picking up a CD, and comparing some numbers. This is the kind of procedure that we can deploy into as many locations as possible to provide as much oversight as possible to these elections with the least amount of work. These states in black are, I guess this is black here, somewhere. One of these states over here is black too. This is a black. New Mexico is considered really good. You can't see the legend at the bottom on the screen, but the purple states are very good. California is very good because we have a 1% manual tally. This has to do with post-election processing, which states do it. These states and the black one are, we think we can do it in those states. The dark brown state or dark tan states are better, and these medium light gray are barely doing anything. And of course the white states have no ability to track anything with a post-election audit. And so it's, as you see, there's not many states that are purple or black here. So it's really not that much of the country, but it is kind of good that we have New York, which is dark gray, and so there's a chance we can do it there. And even in these states where it does show purple, we still need to do some more review to see if the details of their 1% or whatever their post-election process meets up with this. I understand in Minnesota, they do a really good job. They actually implement a snapshot oversight type of process with the universities there, and their whole process expands to a full recount if they can't get it right. So they have it dialed into their law that someone does this process that I'm mentioning here. And if that's the case, then of course we don't have to deploy it there. How to deploy it? And there were some people I was hoping to be here from some of the other groups that were hopefully going to help us deploy it. But they're hopefully watching online. We have people watching the Ustream, or we'll be watching a YouTube or recorded video of this later. And the idea is to get this, reach out to these areas and deploy it by getting those groups started. And the question, can you perform this in your district? If you live in a district and you can make your way to the Registrar of Voters office, deliver a letter and pick up a CD, then that's the groundwork that we need you to do. The rest of it we can do electronically. That's the groundwork that we need that person to do in their district. It's not that much to ask. And the question is, there's 58 counties in California. It's still quite a bit of a number to get 58 people engaged enough to do that little bit. But hopefully we'll find one person in each one of those counties that says, yeah, I'll do that much. I'll put the letter in and pick up a CD. And then the other states we can see, how can we deploy it? I know there's some people in Montana who were very interested in this, and if they do have a tallying procedure that meets this type of level at least, then it can be deployed. And again, COPS can be the central clearinghouse and archiving this information on our server and providing technical support. The idea in the last bullet point here is that we could partner with national organizations such as the American Association of University Women, League of Women Voters, or Common Cause, other groups that are interested in a nonpartisan fashion ensuring the high integrity of our elections. And through their groups of people, their little chapters and stuff, finding people to go in and do this. It has to be done in this next week. So this next week we need to do the letter and get the registrar prepared. So it has to happen fairly quickly. We need people to get going. And then we have a 2-year break before we do it again. So hopefully we'll get at least people started this time and able to see how well it goes before we have its 2-year break and go on to the other area and do it again, because you do learn something every time you do it. Okay, so I see I'm on the last slide here, which is questions and answers. We're doing pretty well on time. We've consumed about 45 minutes. So do you have a chat thing? Do you have people online at all?
Yeah, they can actually ask questions on the Ustream.
Okay, so if there's any there, we can take those, and we'll take people in the room. Okay, is there any questions?
Well, first, let me make sure I bring this microphone over to you so you can ask your questions with the proper audio. And who would like to be first?
Okay, we got a hand over on this side of the room.
Yes, as a person that's been involved at the ballot.
Okay, just say your name real quick.
My name's Daniel.
Okay.
And I've been involved at the voting at the polling places.
Right.
Both in the church and in the school.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons why the security tape isn't good is because they only give you a few security tapes.
Yeah.
And then you break them, and then it's a problem, and they're very easy to break.
Yeah.
But the big problem I have is, and the question I have to ask you, why did they object to cameras being in that room so heavily?
Okay, the cameras in the manual tally room?
Yes.
Yeah, they actually did that. We were surprised about that because in the past, we have actually video recorded the actual ballots as they were counted, and we could see the marking on them, each and every one. And this is what inspired the concept that we've been calling open canvas proposal, which is to simply, instead of having, when the ballot goes through the scanner, instead of looking for the marking on the ballot, whether the little black bubble, and saying that's the vote for so-and-so, just scan the whole thing and make a JPEG file and put it onto a media. And so what you would have at the end of the election is maybe 1.5 million JPEGs. Okay, you wouldn't extract the vote from those JPEGs, and that's what I would like to pick up from the Registrar of Voters office, is some maybe Blu-ray discs, maybe one Blu-ray disc with all of the ballots images. And then how can you hack that? Those are the actual ballots. And then you can have software which goes in and extracts the vote from that point. So we have historically gone in with our camera and watched the ballots being counted with no problem. This new Registrar of Voters said, oh, we don't want the camera to come in because you might see some extraneous marks on the ballots, and that would be an intrusion of privacy for the voter. And this makes no sense to us because if you put extraneous marks on your ballot, you're asking for intrusion. You know, you don't do that. And but we told him that we would be happy to, if we did see any ballots with extraneous marks or we could possibly tell which voter it was, then, you know, maybe somebody just puts, you know, F you, you know, on there, you know, like that, and maybe they don't want to put that on the recording. And I say, well, we will edit that out. Anything that's like that where we could tell them maybe who it was, or my name is Daniel, you know. We said, we'll edit that out. If we ever see that, we'll edit it out. And he was still reluctant. So what we did was we had our camera back so we couldn't see the ballots themselves, but still checking the process. And we could look at the other documents with the camera that they were working on. Some of their tally sheets, we could look at the tally sheets, and they did provide us scanned versions of the tally sheets.
One other question, Ray, that I have is about the mail-in ballots. And from what you explained, they go untallied until after the regular vote. So they are sitting there stacking up, and those could be highly manipulated and lost. If the right vote isn't on there, they could be lost because they have to be open and verified, you said. And even before the vote is even looked at, you're saying that somebody has to read every individual signature and compare that signature. That, to me, just seems like a way overburden to the system and not a very feasible burden to do.
Okay, so let me address a couple of the statements and try to clarify. They do scan some of the ballots in advance of election night. They start scanning those ballots like as soon as, I think they scan them before election night happens. They start the scanning process. It's a question that we need to ask. Do you start scanning them ahead of time? Does anybody know what the results are before election night? We have somebody that knows the answer to that. Okay.
Daniel, can you give him the mic?
Yeah, so we have somebody here. Go ahead and come over here.
The ballots are scanned before election night, and when you see at 8 o'clock the election results on your TV, those are the mail-in ballots that they scanned. The
Right.
first election results
Very
are
first, yeah.
the mail-in ballots.
Right. Okay, so here, keep that in case, why don't you give it back to Daniel so we can finish. Okay, so, right, the very first results that you see exactly at 8 o'clock when the polls close, those are not the precincts, they can't have any ballots from the precincts at that point because they haven't even been brought back, transported in. Those results are from the vote by mail ballot. So those very first results that trickle in, you won't get any results until maybe after 8 o'clock, maybe 11 o'clock, maybe the first ballots the first scans start to come in. But the question is how, I don't know, maybe you can answer. I know that they have those first few, but I don't know how far in advance they get to start. Do they start at the beginning of that day or they start earlier? Does anybody know the initial results inside before the polls close? Because they're not supposed to, you know, you're not supposed to know what the results are looking like until the polls close. Now, the vote by mail ballots are individually checked, and this signature comparison is potential for no end of problems, because you could potentially say, okay, you know, I don't like that signature. Who's going to be checking that? You know, so these. In the last election, for example, Padilla, there was two people running for, what is it, Secretary of State, or who is Padilla running for? Anyway, it's one of those positions, a statewide position, and there were two Democrats, I think, neck and neck in the primary, and they wanted to find out who was ahead. So what they focus on, and there was a gentleman there with us at the Registrar of Voters. He was only there because he wanted to check on the signatures, that how they were being compared. Because who gets their signatures in? How many of those are being discarded? So the vote by mail process has several big problems. It doesn't have a paper tape tracking each one of the precincts, so we don't have no paper trail. It goes directly into the central tabulator after the snapshot can potentially catch it, after the manual batches are selected so that they can unfix the manual batches. So that's why at the end of our process, we think that we have a better control and we can provide better oversight of the precinct balloting rather than the vote by mail ballots, which are out of control, no paper trail, no way to check. So then we have to compare. If this one looks good and the election still flipped because the vote by mail ballots did it, then I think that's another red flag. But the question is, are the red flags big enough for us to take legal action or not? That's something we have to review in each case. Okay, more questions? Is there anybody online, Mike, that has sent in a chat or anything?
Not so far.
Okay.
One last thing I want to say is, at the end of the night, because I was an electronic voter person who dealt with the machine, we put all of it in my car and I brought it back to their ROV in my personal vehicle. So for you to have people to video or to watch where those vehicles go, number one, they're not ROV vehicles. They're personal vehicles many times. And if you get lost, or you go a different way than your lead.
Well, I think we have to check each case and see how it's done. I know that the way they have a lot of precincts here, so if you can imagine 1,600 precincts, they have a few precincts in one area, deliver it to an intermediary point where they put it all into a van, and then that van makes a big jump over to the Registrar of Voters office, and that's where they unload them. It's just what we like to do is try to cover as many aspects as we can with a little bit of oversight here and there. We may not be catching everything, but I think it does help to have people there with cameras and people noticing, gee, they're video recording what we're doing this time. And so we better be more careful. You know, it does help. I think what we need to do is actually try that, see how it goes, and then talk about it. And this is what everybody needs to do. You go ahead, you try the protocol, you try the first part of it, see how it goes. For example, in the first time we tried to deploy this protocol, I came in, I said, I want that CD before you do the manual tally random selection. And they said, oh, it's still in the back, he's working on it, so we're going to have to do the manual selection before you get the CD. And so they selected the manual tally precincts, and then the guy came out with the CD. Protocol then broken. There's no way that we know what happened then, because he kept that back there for a reason, so that he could make sure that those precincts perhaps were fixed back to where they should be, so that it would match when we check the manual tally procedure. And when that happened like that, and they didn't just come out and give it to me right away, that's when I said, big red flag, this is not happening the way it should, and therefore, why did they do this? It could be because they're unfixing those precincts, and therefore that's why we're pushing on this approach. Okay, yes, Pat, get the microphone.
My name's Pat. I also have a problem with the randomness of the picking of the, for the recount. They are the ones that provide the balls with the numbers on them, right?
Yes, they do.
So what's keeping them from leaving out some?
Well, we're there. We're watching them with the balls, and we're actually participating in the selection process. I will say that there is somewhat of a problem in how they've been picking the balls, and this was brought up by other researchers in this area. What they've been doing is picking first the thousands ball, and first they pick the units ball, and then they pick the tens ball, and then they pick the hundreds ball. So let's say you have a count of precincts like we have 1,600 precincts. And let's say after you've done the hundreds ball, you have a number like 700. So what they were doing is not choosing the thousands ball at all and saying, well, it's going to overshoot, and so let's just use that 700 number because it fits down in the lower range. And so therefore, they bias it. they should choose that last ball, and if it comes up a 1 and they've got 1,700 and it overshoots, then they would throw it out and try again. That would be a fair way to do it. But what they're doing here is somewhat unfair, and it biases it down to where they're choosing more in the lower range. What we would like to see, though, is for them to have the hundreds split up in 0 through 16 balls. Have 16 balls in a hopper. You choose one, you pick the other 2 for the 0 to 99, and you don't put this one back. You choose the next one, you do 0 to 99. And therefore you're getting a random selection, but within each hundreds block, so that it kind of more evenly spaces these out. Sometimes we'd have two precincts right next to each other picked, 99 and 100, you know, and they're going to be in the same general area and the same thing. So why do that and then leave off the range of the last 400 with no one selected, no precinct selected? So that's been the problem. Okay, I see that we're basically have completed our hour. I wanted to thank everybody, and if there is any further questions, please email me directly. If you can do this in your area, please let us know so we can help you out. Let's get that letter sent in the next week and get this deployed in as many places as possible. Okay, that's the end. Thank you.